All right, continuing on with the introduction of Inner Work by Robert A. Johnson. This is the last section of the introduction, and then we can get into part 2, which is entitled Dream Work. But for this section, it's titled Conflict and Unification, Credo in Unum, and that's U-N-U-M. So let's get started. Because inner work is a dialogue between conscious and unconscious elements, it always raises the specter of conflict. Inner conflict over values, urges, beliefs, ways of life, morals, and loyalties. The conflicts, of course, are there in any case, regardless of whether we face up to them. But our dream work forces us to look at them. An active imagination, perhaps more than any other form of inner work, brings the conflicts to the surface and gets them out in the open. How can we stand to bring them into the open? Most people can't face inner conflict at all. They impose a kind of artificial unity on life by clinging to the prejudices of their ego and repressing the voices of the unconscious. If there are other parts of ourselves who have different values or different needs, most of us would rather not hear about it. We have already... You hear that? That's my husband downstairs. He's getting his piano practicing, working on striking the chords in the right order. We've been practicing a song called Rosemary's Song from The Giver, that movie. It's a beautiful song, but it's got some tricky hand motions in there. He's working on getting them all in sequence. All right. Let's see, where was I? We have already talked about the pluralism of our inner structure. We know that although we seem to be individuals, we are actually plural beings. Each of us has a great multitude of distinct personalities coexisting within one body, sharing one psyche. We also know that the human mind experiences the world as a duality. We divide the world and our own selves into darkness and light, good and bad, and we stand eternally in judgment, siding first with one side, then with the other, but rarely undertaking the terrible task of integrating all this into a whole. It is perhaps this human tendency to see everything as good or bad that creates the greatest obstacle to accepting and utilizing our varied inner personalities. We don't realize that our categories of good and bad are usually arbitrary and subjective. We derive most of these standards from family, culture, and childhood conditioning without questioning them. If we have the courage to look with open minds at some of the instincts and energy systems within that we have been so ashamed of, we almost always find that they can be positive strengths and that they are merely normal parts of a total human character. As with all our inner contents, they need to be acknowledged, honored, and lived on an appropriate and constructive level. Okay, so that should be read. They need to be acknowledged, honored, and lived on an appropriate and constructive level. It takes courage to go to the bad side of ourselves, to acknowledge it as part of ourselves, to consider that it have a constructive role to play in our lives, that it could have a constructive role to play in our lives. It takes courage to look directly at the fragmentation of our desires and urges. One side seems to argue yes, while another side vehemently says no. One side of my psyche argues for relatedness, rootedness, and stability. Another side wants to go on heroic crusades, have great adventures in exotic places, travel to the other side of the world and live like a gypsy. Yet another personality wants to build an empire and consolidate my power systems. Sometimes these conflicts seem irreconcilable, and we feel torn apart in the conflicts of desires, duties, and obligations that we feel. So again, that sentence is, sometimes these conflicts seem irreconcilable, and we feel torn apart in the conflicts of desires, duties, and obligations that we feel. How then can we go to the unconscious in our inner work and immerse ourselves in the fragmentation and duality? We could not find the courage to face up to the terrible divisions in us unless we felt instinctively that the conflicts must eventually resolve, the warring parts come together in peace, the fragmentation finally reveal a deeper reality, an underlying fundamental unity and meaning in life. A good place to begin our understanding of inner work, although it may seem strange to you at first, is with the Credo, the Nicene Creed. Credo in unum Deum. I don't know how to say this. It's italicized. Credo in unum Deum, which means I believe in one God. Millions of people repeat this statement in one language or another every week. Of course, most of us never consider its implications. It has become another phrase to repeat without thinking about it. Whatever may be your feeling about the creed as a literal religious statement, you should consider what it means on a psychological level. It says that there is only one subject. There is only one source, one beginning, one unity, out of which all the multiplicity of this life flows and to which it returns. Because we sense this principle, we know that no matter what conflicts we encounter, no matter what tangles and collisions we find within ourselves, they are all branches from one trunk. Without this conviction, we would be helpless. Serious dream work and the confrontations of active imagination would be impossible. The sheer multiplicity of our inner selves would overwhelm us. But the Credo teaches us that all these selves, all these energies flow from one indivisible source and can be traced back to that one. One way of doing that tracing is to enter bravely into the pluralism, into the duality through inner work. Who isn't plagued most of lifetime by this duality of life? Masculine and feminine voices within, duty or desire, good or evil, this choice or that choice, follow my heart or follow my mind. We can go on forever reciting the pairs of opposites that express the yin and yang of life. Since we will use these terms, yin and yang again, it may help to explain what is meant. I lost my place, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. In ancient Chinese psychology and philosophy, these words denoted the inherent spontaneous division of the world into pairs of opposites, darkness and light, hot and cold, masculine and feminine. The early stages taught that a grasp of total reality required keeping the pairs of opposites in balance. Yang denoted masculine, in motion, activist, hard, warm, dry, light. Yin denoted feminine, at rest, receptive, soft, cold, dark. The sense in which we use the terms in Jungian psychology is as an expression for the general human psychological experience of duality. We always contain within us attitudes that are complete complementary opposites. Part of us is in favor, part of us is opposed. Part of us wants to move ahead, part of us wants to be quiet and see how things go. One attitude comes from the feminine side, another from the masculine. Wisdom, according to the ancient sages, comes from letting the yin side predominate when its time comes and functioning from the yang side when its turn comes. Regardless of the subject, balance comes only when both sides are given their due. This is interesting because I just was watching a live conference last night actually, called the Emerging Women Live Conference. And it's a free conference I signed up for via email. And it was the introduction night, and they were talking about exactly this. So they were talking about, to an audience of women in business, or just women in general, all kinds of entrepreneurs and things like that. And they were talking about the woman, the CEO. She was talking about how the state of the world right now is showing this very thing, this very imbalance of masculine and feminine energy, and that things have gotten to the way they are because we have been so slanted in the masculine energy. And this doesn't mean specifically male-female, like gender. We're talking about the divine masculine energy, the divine feminine energy, the yin and the yang, the balance and the harmony that is within all of us. That's why inner work is talking about this balance that needs to be made. So here you have the masculine, who is in motion, activist, hard, warm, dry. And so if you look at society and how business, for example, is run, hard, warm, dry, like it's not warm in the sense of what they would say the feminine energy is, which is soft and receptive, and it's just that contrast. So the imbalance right now is why we have a world where people are kind of being heartless and starting to see, it's missing that divine feminine energy that harmonizes and balances it. And so the solution, she was saying, is actually to get back into that flow, that harmony, that balance. And we're calling forth for this divine feminine energy to come back into our existence, into our experience, and see that there isn't just one way. We don't need to just look at things in that tactical, hard, cold, Darwinian way, and we need to harmonize and create a third way, or like in Buddhism, a middle path that balances the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And I thought it was very interesting to see that. And of course, she mentioned the very polarized presidential campaign here in the United States, and I'm not going to get into that because I have my own opinions, and they don't go either way with those two candidates. But yeah, it's very interesting to think about it in terms of the masculine and the feminine energy, and how we are out of balance right now, which is causing so many of the problems that we have. And she was saying, like starvation, hunger, poverty, all of these things that need that feminine touch to creatively solve those problems in a way that isn't how we've been thinking in the past. Moving forward with this. But without this duality, this division of the cosmos, there could be no human life as we know it. It is the price that is paid for our incarnation as conscious beings who inevitably learn to divide the world and to see ourselves as distinct from it. The path toward consciousness begins when we learn to break the primordial unity of our original unconsciousness. Like Adam in the Garden of Eden, we learn to see ourselves as distinct from the world and the people around us. We learn to divide the world into categories, to classify. We begin to divide not only the phenomena outside us, but our own traits and characteristics into opposites. What seems good, in quotes, from what seems bad, in quotes. The things that frighten us from the things that comfort us. That which affirms us from that which threatens and humiliates us. Thus we arrive at self-consciousness, a sense of ourselves as individuals who stand apart from the herd, egos who stand apart from the collective unconscious. But the price that is paid for this consciousness is a heavy one, the fragmentation, the seemingly irreconcilable conflicts within us, the feeling that the universe has fallen apart and has no central core of meaning. We are conscious enough to be torn by the conflicts of life, but not yet conscious enough to sense life's underlying unity. Yet it is by this path that nature becomes aware of its own existence by giving birth to its one witness, human consciousness. I think it's getting at that, like that quote about there's only one God, is once we get back to there's only one, that oneness, we would see I'm one with everything and everyone in the universe. So I begin to exercise this compassion, this more natural way that comes from bringing in that divine feminine, which another video I watched about a shaman or a guide that leads people through parts of Sedona and the vortexes. And he was talking about how the masculine energy is felt like at the top of a mountain. It makes you, if you climb to the top of a mountain, you feel that exhilaration, that conquering feeling, that bigger than life feeling, that majestic nature of power and might of being so grand, is that masculine energy that you could feel when you hike to the top of these peaks. And the feminine energy, the divine feminine, he described as being like this beautiful, powerful, great river that's flowing and has all of this grace and peace and it can move mountains because it has that sort of behind the scenes, that uniting energy that kind of carries within it so much life. Water is life, and water makes up so much of the planet, and then there's all these life forms of fish and all of these things that are existing within it. The woman is the life giver. And so these energies together, both very powerful and very empowering in their own ways, but together they form magic or power, our power, the same power within us that we can manifest when we become in harmony with this. And here there is an excerpt from Carl Jung's book, Collected Works. But why on earth, you may ask, should it be necessary for man to achieve, by hook or by crook, a higher level of consciousness? This is truly the crucial question, and I do not find the answer easy. Instead of a real answer, I can only make a confession of faith. I believe that, after thousands and millions of years, someone had to realize that this wonderful world of mountains and oceans, suns and moons, galaxies and nebulae, plants and animals, exists, and that's italicized. From a low hill in the plains of East Africa, I once watched the vast herds of wild animals grazing in soundless stillness, as they had done from the time immemorial, touched only by the breath of a primeval world. I felt then as if I were the first man, the first creature, to know that all this is, and that's italicized. The entire world around me was still in a primeval state. Primeval? Primeval. It did not know that it was, and that is italicized. And then, in that one moment in which I came to know, the world sprang into being. Without that moment, it would never have been. All nature seeks this goal and finds it fulfilled in man. Every advance, even the smallest, along this path of conscious realization adds that much to the world. And remember earlier in this introduction, we found that they believed, Jung believed, and Johnson is saying that also our responsibility or our purpose here as human beings is to move forward and advance the evolution of consciousness, of understanding of existence, of understanding of ourselves, that I am, that I exist, that we are, that we exist in harmony, and how we can perpetuate our existence and advance our existence, evolve our existence by learning the dynamics of every facet, large and small, of creation and how we fit into it, not to destroy it by trying to conquer and fight and war and cheat and steal, all these things that have become commonplace in the world that are actually creating the likely possibility of extinction of the human race. Like, we are moving away from our spirit, and we're moving away from our ability to be present in the future. And it's deep, it's important to look at it that way. So inner work can help us to ensure that we are living in the most conducive way to the continuing of our race. Once we have stood apart, once we have brought the world into being by becoming conscious of it as distinct from ourselves, our task is still not finished. Each of us carries an intuition, a latent conviction that all this finally adds up to a meaning. There is a universal sense in humans that there is unity and cohesion at the heart of life, and that it is possible for us to be consciously aware of it. So far as I can discover, it is this awareness of the primordial and essential unity of the human psyche that most religions and philosophies have referred to as enlightenment, and that is italicized for emphasis, enlightenment. Inner work teaches us one of the most important principles of the path toward the unified self. Many people believe they can achieve unity by going backwards, avoiding the conflicts, pretending they aren't there. Inner work, as a practical experience, shows us that we can embrace the conflict embrace the duality, bravely place ourselves in the very midst of the warring voices, and find our way through them to the unity that they ultimately express. He says, we cannot go backwards. We can't retreat. We can't find our primordial sense of unity by canceling out consciousness and retreating to animal consciousness, animal unconsciousness. Right? Because when we aren't being conscious of our actions, we act in a very animalistic way, our very primal nature, the very root, the root chakra it's all about, or the bottom of Maslow's pyramid in psychology, which is the base need of a human being, which is survival, food, water, shelter, the need to survive. And so in order to do that, we do things to ensure that I, myself, am okay, and not that we are okay. So he's saying that if we go backwards and ignore consciousness, then we are basically just retreating to our animal unconsciousness. And that's not perpetuating, that's not moving forward in our evolution. Our evolution has taken a different path, and that path is built into us as surely as is the structure of our physical bodies. Our path leads straight ahead, not around the duality, but through it, to a consciousness of its underlying oneness. Our task is to find the fundamental unity and meaning of life without sacrificing our consciousness of our pluralism, our sense of ourselves as distinct and individual beings. It is because the cosmos gets divided into heaven and earth, and because heaven and earth are in dialogue, that the universe has produced a Christ, a Buddha, a Muhammad, and the prophets. Each of them carries the archetype of the unified self and the message that the many are actually one. It is because of the conflicts in our own personal lives and our willingness to face them and convert them into constructive dialogue that we grow toward consciousness. It is our lot, if we are honest, to live in duality and paradox. The dialogue of those paradoxical elements is the stuff of life. Surprisingly, it is also the surest path toward unity. Our dreams are its stage, its workshop, and battleground, and active imagination is its superb language. That's an exciting close. And now we are here on part 2, dream work. We'll continue with that in another video.